are live.
All right, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to call this special council meeting of Tuesday, April 22nd to order and begin by acknowledging gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish, as people have been stewards of these lands and waters from Bowen Island. So welcome to this meeting of April 22nd, 2025, and thank you for joining. For those of you that are following online or later in the future, I'm Andrew Leonard, the Mayor of Bowen Island Municipality, Chair of this meeting. I'd also like to introduce the other elected members of our council today, as I always do. Starting on my far right, we have Councillor and Islands Trustee Sue Ellen Fast. To her left is Councillor and Islands Trustee Judy Getty. To my almost far left, I'll introduce the gentleman on the far left in a moment, but we have Councillor Tim Lake. To his right is Councillor Alison Morse. And also joining us today are members of our professional staff team, including Karen Dillon, our Chief Administrative Officer, and Sophie Insignia, our Corporate Officer. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public, either online or in person, speak to the question and answer portion of our meeting, your presence and voice will be included in our permanent recording, which is available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca and is streaming on our YouTube channel to the masses right now. The agenda and full council package for today's meeting is available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca for folks that want to follow along, although there really is only one item. And with that, I will look for the introduction in late items today.
No later.
No late items. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda for the April 22nd meeting? Moved by Councillor Wade, seconded by Councillor Morse. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye, that carries unanimously. On to the main event.
Thank you.
Give that a close. I'm very happy to introduce our member of the Legislative Assembly here today, Jeremy Valeriote. He's joining us all the way from Whistler, I believe, is your home base. Has had a busy few months, and this is our first opportunity to get together with Jeremy and members of the staff. And maybe I'll turn it over to you to make any introductions you like and any comments. We can go from there.
Great. Thanks, Mayor Leonard, and thanks, Council, for inviting me. I'm about 6 months in since BC Election Day, so apologies it's taken this long. It has been a busy few months, and but this is really the first of what I hope is a series of meetings where I can hear from you and hopefully find some way to collaborate on solutions. Just start out by saying Happy Earth Day to everyone, and congratulations on your brand new community center and spacious, bright council chamber. That's a nice thing to see. And I'll also just mention off the top that we have a single constituency office for the riding, which is located in Squamish, but we will be, we'll be roving around the riding on mobile fronts and visiting Bowen regularly. I'll introduce my caucus staff. Jatinder Sidhu on the right is the lead for our constituency staff. Paige Calvert left, constituency staffer, and we also have Sophie Wallace based in Squamish, and then Connor Buzza and Kayla Bennett are our legislative interns in our caucus staff in Victoria, and so they're joining us until the end of May, early June, learning all the goings on in the BC legislature. So, which is a place where I've spent too much time, more of my time than I would like, because so obviously nice to be home. I have a young family, but also my main job is representing you in the Sea to Sky in the constituency. So as we get to the end of May, that the work in Victoria will ease off, and I'll be able to spend more time focused on the West Van Sea to Sky. This is a break week, so I get to spend my time here, and we're back in the legislature till the end of May. Because it's our first meeting, I'll kind of quickly catch you up, and we can get into much more preferred questions and discussion. So I'll just quickly describe from election day, or the day after election day, until just before the Christmas break. basically directly thrown into a not quite a confidence of supply, but a cooperation agreement with the NDP government, who had a bare majority. 47, which is quite tenuous, so they were looking for our support, and we were willing to give it on certain conditions. So some of you may have seen it. I won't go into a lot of detail, but we can, if there's items of interest, we can get into them in a discussion. But we can do a cooperation and responsible governance accord where we give our confidence votes for any confidence measures, including the budget. And in return, we were able to negotiate a series of measures that include funding for launching and maintaining a new community health center. So I was really pleased to get a tour of yours, which is kind of one of the models, including as well as Whistler 360 and Shoreline Medical on the island. I'm sad to hear I think it's your executive director is moving on, but that's a really shining accomplishment for the community. So more of that across BC is what we're looking for, trying to make that model go further. Bringing psychologists into the health system. So there's certain amounts of funding attached to each of these, $50 million to integrate 200 psychologists as a start into MSP. 7,500 units of non-market housing this year and 30,000 over the term. Some rental assistance, including SAFER, which is shelter aid for elderly rentals, and rental assistance program. The recapitalizing of the rental protection fund, and then a couple of overall reviews that we were involved in terms of reference and execution of that are really needed at this point. One of which is a review of the forest sector, which has been, essentially making no one happy for the last several decades, but now with tariffs, just additional pressures. So really what could be a paradigm shift in the forestry sector that will be undertaken by a panel of experts, and hopefully come up with some new solutions for BC forests. Protection of Fairy Creek, which we're quite proud of, is one of the items that we were able to get in that accord. A review of the Clean BC climate plan, which needed to be reviewed next year, but moved up by a year. So currently working on terms of reference and two co-authors for that review, which we're hoping to wrap up by October. And I have to say that Energy Minister Adrian Dix has been quite proactive on that, and I think we'll get a new view of how to meet some of our climate targets, which programs are working, which are, and how we need to look at this going forward. As you know, we're not currently meeting climate targets, and that's a problem. Investment in heat pumps has been announced, $50 million each year for the next 2 years to install more heat pumps. And a special committee on democratic reform that my colleague, the MLA for Sandwich North and the Islands, who actually lived on Bowen many years ago, Rob Bottrell, he's going to head that one up. It is a special committee to look at not just the wrinkles, to speak, well, the difficulties with the last election, but also overall problems with voter turnout and engagement, and then the possibility of a different system of representation. We're obviously been asking for proportional representation. There have been 3 referenda on that since 2005, and the purpose of this committee is to look at options, keep the conversation alive until the time comes when the public is ready to contemplate it again. But it is, the low turnout and lack of engagement is a serious concern, no matter how we count votes. Removal of a property transfer tax loophole, and then some removal of spousal clawbacks for disability benefits. And the last one is regional transit. So the wording of the agreement is that we will implement regional transit to Sea to Sky in 2025. That's we're already April, so that's a big task, but it is underway. Pretty optimistic about where we can get to with this. Implementation, there's quite a number of things to sort out, but we've been talking to local governments that will, I guess, the sea to sky. I have to say, I don't know that we've had a lot of, other than informal conversations with Bowen, but the idea would be that Horseshoe Bay is a transit hub, as it should be, and it already is, and that it would be integrated into any regional transit plan. So those are the highlights. That's been, to be honest, that's the bulk of our work. We were obviously got involved in Bill 7, which was the tariff act, giving some pretty sweeping powers to the cabinet. We're still working on that, but I think we were able to take out some of the more concerning aspects. Yeah, none of the legislation has been that a lot of note so far. The few things coming, we had to take the step of voting against the repeal of the carbon tax on a principled basis, and that was a losing vote, 2 of us to 90 other MLAs, but we felt it was important to, at that point, without a replacement, repealing the carbon tax, although it's nice for everybody's pocketbook when they fill up with fuel right now, it's not a long-term solution. So yeah, Bill 7 is ongoing. Rob's been in committee till all hours of the night on Bill 7, trying to clarify some of the special powers and reduce the timeline, and get more transparency into that. And I think with that, I know you've got some topics on for discussion, but I think I'll just, yeah, I mean, a overall legislative agenda, there's a couple more, there will be some fast tracking of environmental assessment coming down the line that we'll have to take a close look at. Fast tracking of clean energy wind projects, we'll take a different view of than fast tracking LNG or bitumen pipelines, but it still needs to be looked at with a lot of rigor, and that's what I know of coming down for the rest of April and May, and then we finished sitting at the end of May and not back till October, so there'll be a lot of time to sort out some community issues, but also say there's a number of ministers, most of them I would say, they're quite happy to work with us. We've been able to push some of their items to the front floor. I actually didn't even mention watershed governance, which I think we'll talk about in a minute here, but it's been quite helpful to see the level of cooperation that we've been able to bring, and I'll say, the official opposition, the Conservatives, have brought forward some good ideas that we've been able to support, and trying to keep it civil. I'll touch quickly on, there's been some concerning, couple of independent MLAs concerning things about Indigenous reconciliation that we've had to push back on, but overall, it does seem to be a little bit more cooperative than what it would look like in an election campaign. So yeah, I will pour myself a glass of water and see if anybody wants to talk about legislative things or jump straight into community.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of directions we'll go, and maybe I'll look to council for some guidance on this. We can either look some of those provincial legislative pieces, or there are some proposed items here on the agenda that we can dig into, start speaking about as well. I guess maybe any follow-up questions for the MLA before we get into one specific issues? Councillor Fast, followed by Councillor Beatty.
I was just, thanks, Jeremy. I was just interested in the review of the forest sector by the panel of experts. Do you have timelines on that, or?
That actually is, we're having to divide and conquer a little bit. So that's Rob Bottrell's file. I believe that in terms of reference and panel will be in the next couple of weeks. And I don't have details on, well, until they're released, I don't have a lot of details in terms of reference, but it is meant to be an overarching comprehensive view of both coastal and interior forests, and some of the approaches that we've taken, and then incorporating the tariff pressures. So, but I will certainly make sure that we send that out when.
Sure, that'd be great. I'm just interested because I'm seeing the warnings about wildfire risk and that kind of thing already coming, and we're sensitive to that as an island. So that's just one aspect of it. And also, we depend on our sponge island as our water towers. We've got 40% of Bowen's crown land. And so we need healthy forests. And so a couple of times in the past, we've had to fend off industrial logging. And I'm hoping that the new regulations, whatever comes out of the review, will help protect nature on Bowen, so nature can protect us, kind of thing. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to prejudge it, but I think overall we will see some support for the industry. There are a lot of families being supported by forests, but also a recognition of the ecosystem services and the other benefits that forests bring, and a balancing of those with industrial, resupply. Hopefully that will help go on.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Getty.
So I've never had a briefing in terms of what's happening with legislation. There's a process that used to happen with the trust. The staff person has left, but keeping track of updates on legislation. I'm wondering if you've got any kind of assistance so that we can get on a mailing list, or if you've got any way that you're planning on reporting out fairly regularly like this. It's very interesting. I think it would be good to keep track.
I think we're, again,
Sign up for a mailing list.
I know we're 6 months in, and I have yet to write a newsletter, which is by those things that we're getting to. But I think that's a suggestion that I don't know if we've had. And I think it's something we'd be happy to take on in terms of sending out to councils, all the councils, on what legislation. And to be honest, a lot of it has been housekeeping so far, except for
Pretty dull so far.
yeah. Yeah, I think it will pick up, because there's a lot to do in the last 5 weeks, but yeah, we'll take that away and we could bi-weekly, because I think realistically I'll only get in here a couple times a year, but like a bi-weekly or monthly legislative update, so that especially things that might affect council work, and just so you're up to speed with provincial. Happy to do that. Thanks for that.
So we're not expecting you here bi-weekly then?
Nobody likes
Okay.
But I think that's easier way to keep you up to speed than a couple times a year, quarterly, or whenever we're gonna get together, so.
Yeah, and I would assume any of those interests are shared across the riding as well.
Yeah, most of them are going, but it's certainly my job to represent you, but also keep you up to date with what's going on, so.
Okay. So we've got a number of topics here. Maybe I'll just set the frame for all of them individually, and then we can start going through the discussion bullet by bullet, if that works for everyone. So the topics that have come up for us over this last little bit, the first is we have it labeled as Rural Economic Diversification Infrastructure Program, although this is a conversation that I think is tied into a larger piece about where does Bowen fit within the regional municipal landscape, given just the small size of our tax base and what we do and don't get from Metro Vancouver, and as a result of being proximal to the larger municipalities. There's some pieces we've heard from the Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation that I think we would take exception to and disagree with in terms of their reasoning and logic for keeping us excluded from some of these rural programs.
Okay.
The second, always a hot topic here on Bowen, is ferry performance, terminal infrastructure and traffic management. We've been involved in advocacy and work with BC Ferries, try and have them become more accountable for their biggest minor route in the system, which sees 1 million passenger trips come and go from Snug Cove without any investment or either financial or human to help us mitigate some of the congestion that we see down there. And I think this past long weekend is just has a lot of folks worried that it's going to lead to another very difficult season, as we've seen in the past few. Third is probably no surprise to anyone from the provincial government that we would love to talk about funding for infrastructure, as that's a core and very expensive topic for us as we look to do some renewal and replacement. I think we'd be happy to give you some of the directions that we've taken and the responsibilities and accountabilities that we've taken on as a municipality. Although there's going to need to be, I think, some assistance from senior levels of government to help us get to a place of capital security. I think or infrastructure security is a good way to characterize it. Funding for watershed security. We've been making changes to the governance of our water systems on the island, but also given the impacts of climate and the need to mitigate and adapt to climate risks. We're starting to have more of a conversation about what watershed management looks like, or a whole island sort of approach to watershed management in context of some of those. I'd love to talk about that. Sustainable tourism management is a tricky one for Bowen. So, you know, in our conversations at UBCMs with the Tourism, Arts and Culture Ministry, you know, we fit into a weird category where we're not really begging for tourism, and it's not, and I would characterize it as it's not because there's a real NIMBY sentiment on the island, although I think it can get there when we're particularly stressed, but because of the growth that we're seeing in the region and the lack of ability to really invest in the town center here, we're being overwhelmed by visitation in a way that a tax base of 4,200 people just can't keep up with, and trying to figure out, you know, being in this real small sort of over touristed group of communities. And there's probably less than 5 in the province. There's no like sort of provincial funding stream that addresses some of those impacts to mitigate the effects of tourism that, you know, can create difficulties in the lives and lifestyles of our residents. There's been a what do we call it the other night? A noisy boat in Howe Sound. Yeah. Or a loud vessel, as I think we ended up putting in our meeting agenda. That's been difficult to sort of capture the reason why, but it's almost like an industrial party barge of some sort that just makes a lot of noise in Howe South. And then there might be other topics of interest here too. I'll just look around council just to capture if there's anything else that we'd like to hit on. Well, we've got the MLA here as a captive audience.
I just have, would like to give a brief update on the biodiversity and ecosystem things that Bowen has done recently in the last few years. Some of them might be of interest.
Councilor Morris.
2 things that the coastal marine strategy. It was a long time in coming. When we thought we were going to get the draft and when we actually published it, I guess just, you know, it actively being implemented. And then again, all emergency management legislation that's coming out. The regulation. Just if you've got any information on either of those.
There's one more I wanted to add, but it totally escaped my mind on the first morning back from a long weekend, so I might reserve the right to come back to it later, so we can talk about it then. So let's start in order then. So one of the challenges that we have, and we've been excluded from, we asked for an exemption to the rural economic diversification and infrastructure program. We've also asked multiple times to be included in the island's coastal economic trust, which is something that we're not a part of. And we've been rejected on all counts multiple times. And I think part of the reasoning is, or the reasoning that we seem to get from the province is that one, we're a member of Metro Vancouver as a regional district, and as a result, I think there's some feeling from the ministry that the there's benefits that accrue to us as a result of that. And second, in our most recent letter of rejection, it was says that the current definition of rural used by the program excludes communities located within the Metro Vancouver Regional District due to their urban nature. And as a result, Bowen Island municipality is not eligible to apply for funding through the program. And I think the challenges that we have with this, first of all, being a member of the Islands Trust, we're excluded from legislatively through participation in any regional growth strategy. So any island that's part of the Islands Trust is not a party to a regional growth strategy in any regional district, which is a key element. Second, even if we were, Bowen Island sits far outside the urban containment boundary, which I think makes us less urban. And I think another issue is that the Metro Vancouver Regional District is actually 4 boards. So it's the Metro Vancouver Regional District, the Housing Corporation, the Sewage and Drainage District, and the Water District. So Bowen Island does not participate. We're not a member of water and sewer. And as a result, we do not participate in the economies of scale that accrue to Metro Vancouver as a result of that. So all of our infrastructure, including 7 local service areas for water, a local service area for sewer, is all managed municipally. So in some respect, we become a little bit like the Bowen Island Regional District, managing 7 separate water systems, a sewer system, and needing to fund all of that renewal on the back of a population of 4,200. And in addition, having a bunch of impact in the local service area dealing with sewer in Sun Cove here in our Cove Bay water system, being influenced by the visitation from the mainland that we cannot capture value from. We can't tax tourists, we can't charge an improvement fee, but at the same time, we see hundreds of thousands of visitors a year impacting water and sewer in a community that's funded by a tax base of 4,200 people. So that makes it really difficult. In addition, to that, it also feels both from the REDIP program as well as ICE-T, given that Salt Spring is a member of these programs, and given that Nanaimo is a member of these programs, they enjoy the same proximity to larger municipalities.
Gabriel.
Gabriel, sorry.
Yeah.
Gabriel being off the coast of Nanaimo. They are in similar situations with their regional districts. However, they're, it's understood, I think, that because they're members of the Islands Trust and because they are islands and they're disconnected from the mainland, that they get to be a part of these things. And the last sort of, I think, aggravating factor in relation to Metro Vancouver is that 90% of any money that we could get from the Canada Community Building Fund, which, as you might know, can be is unique in British Columbia because it's administered by UBCM, and other provinces it's a direct stream from the federal government to municipalities that is open for the funding of any infrastructure. But in BC, the agreement that Metro Vancouver has with UBCM is that the Metro Vancouver board gets to decide for all of the municipalities within Metro Vancouver where that money is going to be applied. And currently, 90% of it goes to TransLink for service that the outlying communities who have the smallest say at the table don't necessarily see a lot of value out of it. So for these reasons, we could really use some help, I think, in advocating to whoever it is in the ministries that for Bowen Island's inclusion in some of these rural programs, advocating for a better clarification of where we fit in this landscape as a function of being within the Islands Trust, as a function of having a small property tax base, and as a function of not participating in the economies of scale of Metro Vancouver. And ultimately for inclusion in some of these programs that are targeted towards smaller communities. We can really use the help in offsetting the growth pressures that we're experiencing from the mainland, but aren't deriving any financial value from.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for describing it. So you're in a difficult spot geographically and population wise. Just a couple of quick clarifications. So this was the reply that came back, the REDIP intake that closed October of last year. Put in a submission and got the reply that essentially you don't qualify. Is that right? Is that the most
Yeah, so I believe our CAO put in an application, received a letter that, you know, our exemption wasn't approved. And then in tandem with that, we did meet with Jedi in two successive UBCMs, so the last two UBCMs asking for inclusion in iced tea in particular, and some of these rural programs. And then we received a formal letter from the ministry side on those requests that were also denied.
Sorry, we have received a permission to apply for grants and gotten grants from the Rural Economic Diversification Program in the past, but never any pickup at all of being included in the iced tea area. And Salt Spring is not included in iced tea. Or
Yes, they are.
They're in iced tea?
Yeah. So is Gabriel.
But why did Salt Spring, what about?
That's what I asked the Jedi folks and the minister at UBCM, and they didn't have an answer, and that's why they responded by letter, I think.
What about the other Southern Gulf Islands?
They're all in iced tea, everybody except Bowen.
Okay, but I think the logic for that is they added one of the electoral areas out in Onfuga, which was John Horgan's riding. So to be fair, they had to do the other.
I know the mayor and maybe, I don't know if any other councils were at AVICC.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that as full members or is that as?
They're now
Full
fully
member.
card-carrying members of two local government associations.
Okay. And part of that was the thought that that might be a route to inclusion in iced tea, or is it?
I'm not sure. I don't think it was that self-serving. I think there was the,
Fair issues.
well, fair issues being one of them. Actually, see, Councillor Fast with her hand up. So Councillor Fast really led the advocacy for our inclusion. So I'll let Councillor Fast speak to some of the reasons why we were.
Thanks. Yes, this was just a week and a half ago or whatever. And we, this is the first time 5 of us from council went. I've been going for a few years over the past 2.5 terms because it's communities like ours that are very dependent, that have a rural character and have all kinds of shared interests like water shortages in the summer, things that Metro Vancouver doesn't deal with. And so I always learned more and met comparable elected folks from comparable communities that we could look at what they're doing, find out how we could collaborate together. And Islands Trust is a member of that one. So this time we were able to sit at the same table and begin to do more, set the stage for more collaboration anyway. I also thought that it would help us learn more about why and how some of the communities are in iced tea and we aren't. So now I have a lead as to somebody who can, who was instrumental in getting Salt Spring in apparently. So I know who to talk to, that kind of thing.
Sounds good.
It also makes a difference in terms of other funding sources. So we applied to the rural transportation, I can't remember the exact title. And they struggled with rural as well. So in terms of deciding, trying to get us with a label of rural because of the restrictions, I think, and choices in terms of trying to stay green and trying to, figure out how to be a commuting bedroom community and still be rural without a whole lot of farmland, but a lot of crown land. It's one of these mixed bags. But in terms of opening up funding possibilities for small scale, if we get into infrastructure and the history of it, when we became incorporated, we didn't negotiate very well in terms of all of the funding that we ended up requiring. We don't have the staff, we didn't have any staff then, and if we don't have, over the years, the staff that can help figure out how to budget so that we've got savings for infrastructure and how to deal with all of the changes and the demands for water and health and some other things. So it's, I think now we're in a situation where we've got some really good professionals that help with all of those kinds of issues, but for the long, 20 years, 25 years is incorporated, and it's just been a bit of a ragtag, small community, volunteer, pull it all together as best you can. And we've got, it's all coming home now in terms of some of the reports that we're getting in terms of infrastructure problems, and any kind of expansion is almost impossible. So the organizations like Ice-T, I think we did get some funding from them once.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, and the others, they will make an exception and, you know, figure out a way of getting around it if they like the project, but that's rare, and it's not. That's an extra hurdle that we have to jump through in terms of getting both local and regional, and we fell apart in terms of getting the federal funding for transportation. So it would be a big deal.
Thanks for that. I'll just preface this all by saying I'm 6 months in. I'm still learning what I can and can't do, mostly just trying to do everything and waiting for.
Nothing short of a commitment that you're gonna solve all of our problems.
But also, you know, talking to Jordan Story, former MLA, and lots of other people who have been able to get some of this work done. So some of it I've got to take away and come back in a few months. But I'm part of this, the value for this, for me in this hearing from this, and just maybe thinking about other things I've heard from across the province. So I know the resort municipalities, I believe, are talking to the province about the cost of tourism and what they're expected to absorb. I mean, Whistler, you know, or sorry, 16,000 permanent residents, but 50,000 in on a weekend, and expected to, you know, pick up those costs. The resort municipality initiative helps with some of those. I'm gonna guess that the resort municipality of Bowen is not even a thing that I should have uttered in words, but you know, there are other ways. So Squamish is a perfect example of a non-resort municipality that's having to absorb a lot of these costs. So I would encourage you, either politicians or staff, to talk to Squamish and Whistler, and I'll think of a couple others that are in the similar boat where, you know, a local tax base is being asked to cover the cost of tourism with no way to recoup. Yeah, I think that was part of the point of the resort municipality initiative funding, but I think that's an option here. So we find a creative way to get you out of this kind of no man's land that you're in. But so that's part of it. But also, I think the classification of rural is something that I'd be happy to talk to the Jedi minister about, because I think you are being, I guess, unfortunately, you know, the system looks to exclude whenever possible because we're provincially in a bit of financial bind, but I don't think that. I think it's more of a technicality here as opposed to, you know, being part of Metro Man doesn't make you urban. So we'll have to look into what places like Anmore or University of Belcarra, University of Darwin lands would have similar issues. But I mean, obviously looking, you know, this already looking for allies is pretty helpful. But let me take this one away and see what sort of the rural transportation. I think, you know, Pemberton takes advantage of that. They're essentially the same size as you, and really probably even more connected than Bowen is. But let me look at just the exclusion. Read it, because I don't know when the next read it call is going to be, but it would be helpful to get clarification on that.
Now I'm gonna have to remember, and just a couple of more background facts. We can't participate in water supply from Metro Vancouver because we're in the Annos Trust, and so clearly states that there won't be any interconnected water lines. So even if we wanted to get water from Metro Vancouver. And because we are in TransLink, we don't pay hospital tax. And so if we weren't part of TransLink, we'd be paying hospital tax. And if there is a benefit of being part of TransLink, we all ride on the 250 and the 257 and whatever. It's, and I know from having been in discussion with TransLink, it's really hard to quantify the benefit you get from that perspective.
Slightly off topic, but in terms of rural infrastructure, you just remind me, sorry, how this center was funded? There was some provincial. Obviously,
Yeah, there's a grant of about 8 million. There was fundraising, and then there was a municipal contribution, so we went out to referendum.
Or,
Yeah, for 4 million, and then our Urban Communities Fund money, in large part went to covering some over this year.
Yeah.
The COVID relief also went into this project as well.
the grant was both provincial and federal, or
Yeah.
okay, the infrastructure, yeah.
infrastructure. Yes, okay. Just, having success, but it's hard to replicate that success with some of the exemptions.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe just to close the loop on this one, one of the pieces that from my seat, which is a real fascinating governance paradigm for the island is Bowen Island is the only municipality. So we've got more governance on our island than any other municipality in the province, just as a function of being a member of the Islands Trust, as well as being being our own municipality. It's the only municipality within the Islands Trust. Then a layer of governance from the Islands Trust itself, and a layer of governance from Metro Vancouver as well. And so part of that AVICC versus LMLGA question for us, and then for me, who sits on a number of these boards, there's a bit of a split personality, it feels sometimes on Bowen, where because we are so intimately connected with the mainland for work and amenities like medical appointments, recreation, things like that, that there are things that we do share with the mainland. However, in some of those rooms, we certainly feel like the odd, or I feel like the odd person out, right? Sitting in the room with mayors and councils of Vancouver and Surrey, and south of the Fraser, those folks and characters in the room there can be, it doesn't always feel like we fit. And I think part of the reason for joining the AVICC is that we do culturally, from like a social fabric point, we feel like we're more connected to some of those island communities. But as a result, I think there's sometimes in the interactions with the province, there's not a sense really of where we fit in all that. I know that the Islands Trust is going through its own governance process, governance reviews, some opinions of that from various folks in the legislature as well. But there's, I think, a need to define what Bowen is as an island municipality, as the only island municipality within the province with these sort of intersecting Venn diagram of governance with Metro Vancouver to the east of us, and then the Islands Trust to the west. It makes it really difficult, I think, to participate in some of these programs or feel like, yes, Bowen Island is a fit. Yeah, because the other option to go the other way in leaning more towards the Metro Vancouver side is changes to the regional district governance where we do get to participate as economies of scale. So, Bowen Island's water systems are taken up by the region, and sewer system is taken up by the region. I see Councillor Moore shaking her head. That's a conversation that, particularly the Village of Lions Bay, myself are having as well. It's what's our place in Metro Vancouver and what's the benefit derived out of it? Right. And can there be more equity in those economies of scale?
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about
That was an easy one.
ferries. So here we've got ferry performance, terminal infrastructure, and traffic management. So I think the view of council, and council feel free to jump in if I have this wrong. There's a sense that ferry performance, given the growth that we're seeing in the region, given the growth that we're seeing on the island, given the growth that we're seeing across the system, and given the lack of capital investment in that ferry system, Bowen Islanders are feeling that the ferry service performance is degrading year over year. And there's been, some very showy engagements that I think BC Ferries has had. However, we're not seeing a lot change in terms of operational investment or capital investment in the system. It's, you know, it's come to the point where it's really affecting the livelihoods of citizens. We've seen in the last couple of summers and the last couple of seasons, half day or full day cancellations, which leave people stranded on the island. And you know, during one winter, left all of our high school kids stranded on the mainland. And there just hasn't been a lot of uptake in BC Ferries beginning to take accountability, particularly for their Snug Cove side terminal operations here. So the message that we've gotten back from BC Ferries is that after vehicles and passengers are discharged from the ferry, it's ultimately it's municipal roadway, it's municipal responsibility. I think we're starting to get to the point where we disagree heavily with that. It's not our job to build transit stations for Translink. It's not our job to build schools. It's not our job to fund a military. So it's a different layer of government or a different government agency that really needs to take accountability for what's effectively a public transportation option and the only mainland connection between Horseshoe Bay and Bowen Island here. So we've requested, most recently, a couple of months ago, we've asked, and we said, hey, like, our residents are looking to us to solve this problem as a municipality. We don't see it's our problem. We're happy to take it on, but we need the funding to do it. We cannot do it on the back of a property tax base of 4,200 people. We've asked them for, I believe it's $150,000 a year to pay for ferry marshals, to pay for roadway improvements in Snug Cove, including signage and lane paintings, to mitigate some of the utter chaos that happens from the foot of the ferry terminal all the way back up to the school here every peak season. We've asked for operational changes, such as, if there's not going to be capital investment in capacity, maybe there can be operational changes to assured loading for residents at peak time so that they can access jobs and medical appointments and get their kids to and from school, which has been turned down as well. And then when there are operational changes, like we just saw a change in our ferry schedule, which is going to impact school kids, particularly in the afternoon, as well as residents looking to come back from jobs from the mainland in the evening ferry. There was no consultation. The schedule was just released to the community. And we had high school principals struggling to make sense of it and change their schedules. We've had residents that are frustrated by it. So there's a difficulty both in funding human infrastructure and capital infrastructure, as well as engaging on operational changes that just seems unsustainable for the island. On the heels of that, it's very difficult to get answers for anybody to take accountability for this. So BC Ferries management and up to CEO will point at the commissioner and point at the province, right? The commissioner will point at BC Ferries and point at the province. The province will say, we have sat across from Minister Fleming at UBCM and said, well, BC Ferries is a private entity, despite them appointing board members and commissioners and things like that. So there's this game of Spider-Man pointing at each other that happens with BC Ferries that I think is across the entire system, delivering performance and leading to lack of accountability. Just this morning, I had Mayor White call me from Gibson's, and with the question, like, what are we going to do about these ferries? How was your long weekend? We had a little therapy session between Gibson's and Bowen Island, trying to figure out what to do. And the tone of it is that we're both at a loss of how to get any action from any of the organizations or any of the institutions that manage the ferry system. And I'm curious, just from either an MLA perspective or a Green Party perspective, I mean, what is the path forward in investing in the ferry system in a way that ferry affected communities can have reliable, funded service that's not going to disrupt and be a detriment to the lives of residents.
It supplies you to reflect that this is those wicked problems that's been ongoing for a long time, but I feel like Bowen's got the short end of it. The last 3 years, on-time performance is plummeted. There's certain places where I think I'm useful in jumping in, but I also don't want to be in the middle of conversations with you and be serious. So we did have an initial meeting with staff, and Rob Montrell and I have requested a meeting with the CEO. Luckily, he's got all this other filings through, so there's a bit of a concentration of interest there that I think we can leverage. But yeah, and we got the message that there's not a lot of money BC Ferries, which, you know, it's different from the days that I was involved with the Ferry Advisory Committee for the Langdale route. They were going to spend hundreds of millions upgrading Horseshoe Bay, and things were looking rosy. I know COVID took a lot of the shine out of that, but at that time they were interested in solutions. But I will say we got the impression that ferries had consulted with council, and I do, as much as I think the Ferry Advisory Committees might have had a purpose, I'm not opposed to it. They've made their decision on that, and they will have some. They're going to roll out some kind of new engagement thing, but consulting with this body, I think, would have a lot of benefit. I got the impression they consulted with you on the schedule, so if that's not the case, it's good for me to push back on, because there's, you know, it's not I feel for the people that work in public engagement at BC Ferries, it's got to be a thankless job, but I also want to get the truth from them about what consultation is happening. And then I think, you know, 150,000 is pretty modest ask, I think, for starting out. That kind of situation wouldn't be allowed to happen at any other terminal except for Horseshoe Bay, I guess, on a long weekend when a ferry goes out of service. But that doesn't sound unreasonable to me. So that's for a follow-up conversation. But I wanted to hear from you first, because they said, oh, we've been talking to Owen, and maybe those conversations have been happening, but until they're productive, it's not that valuable for you. They were interested in providing rain shelters, but I think you're actually reasonably well equipped in Snack Cove. That's, you know, you're looking for easy, quick wins, and this is a longer term issue. So let us keep in touch as we continue to push on them. It's a new minister, Minister Farnworth's got a lot of experience. Maybe he can find a way through, but definitely, yeah, go back at EBCM and advocate for what you need for marshalling. I'm not sure. I love the idea of resident assured loading. Sounds like it's for the moment it's not getting a lot of traction, but this is, like you say, people's livelihoods. So I'm happy to jump in when you think it's valuable, and let you do the liaison as you feel like you're making progress. And when you run up against the wall, then maybe I can unstick some of this.
Right, and to be clear, you know, I think some of it isn't. I think it's great that Marines are having meetings with BC Ferries, and that might not necessarily need to be a pool to jump in too deep. I think the local elected officials are in there as well, talking operation.
Yeah.
But we did hear from the Premier, I think it was 2 years ago, the Premier made some bold statements about how things at BC Ferries needs to change. And we haven't seen anything from Premier since. We didn't see a whole lot from Minister Fleming, and certainly haven't heard anything from Mr. Farmer so far about what is the plan to fix the system. And I don't believe that the provincial government leaning on the line that BC Ferries is a private independent organization holds water, because it's effectively not. It's an arm's length corporation that needs, you know, the province holds the performance contract for that entire system. And there needs to be some accountability there from the government about what are we going to do to fix it. Some bold action from the government on housing. I'd love to see some bold action for the government on the factors that support housing, like transportation, like infrastructure, like schools and hospitals, and pieces as well. So I think, you know, that's the noise that can be made in the legislature.
Well, they say they're consulting, and they come out with just the public relations speakers first. And all the issues are operational. And there's nobody there in any of those consultations that knows how the terminals run, how the ferries load. I mean, one of the systems, there's gotta be the best way to unload the ferry, and each crew does it differently. You know, I mean, it's just simple things. And, you know, I can go on quite late about that structure of the ferry and why they did it, and, they wanted to get the debt off the books, and, we had a long discussion in the budget review panel as to whether or not they were part of a consolidated entity. And because of the way the directors are appointed and whatever, it's not. But the commission never comes to UBCM. Nor does the authority ever come to UBCM. BC Ferries doesn't. They have their public relations people at UBCM. Which, you know, we got some nice pens and a few goodies, but they can't talk about operations, they have no knowledge. So you never get to talk with people that have the knowledge to fix them.
Yeah, I mean, keep making that request when they, to meet with you. We want somebody, you know, who knows, we want somebody from operations. That's kind of the only success that ever happened on the Langdale route, was sitting down with the two people who knew how everything worked, and when pushed, they came up with the triangle route of using the Nanaimo ship to do a Langdale run to make it doable for commuters, but that was the only time that there was any major leap forward, was for people who knew the operation well enough to come up with a creative solution and implement it, and I think that's what you need. So here people are, you know, yeah, and they're buried under complaints, so they're not, yeah. It's very, I'm sure, I don't know how it's structured, but I'm sure it's very difficult for them to come up with real solutions, so. And we'll ask for the same when we meet with them. So there's a few operational pieces that could probably make a lot of difference, particularly the Marshall Islands.
Councilor Getty, followed by Councilor Ness.
I think when they disbanded the ferry advisory committees, they said that they were going to be coming up with some alternative, and they haven't. What they've done is hire a group of people that are skilled at marketing. And they're very, very nice people, which is the process and the whole function of marketing. But it doesn't help with the system that they have, that is each silo points at the other. They never all come to the same table, and they never come up with working together to come up with solutions. So, you know, the whole business about whether or not they can collect any kind of a tourist tax by the people that are driving their cars on, just all the walk-on passengers. And they say that they can't, they don't have the jurisdiction, that it's up to the finance minister. And then he says it's up to the transportation minister. They say that it's something that has to go to the, and they are all just passing the buck, and nothing actually happens. So one of the things that I said to Ralph Ottawa was that, you know, with his banking, they would maybe listen to him and take him seriously in terms of, and if he came up with some sort of a financial plan to collect that kind of a tax, that would, you know, he'd be the most popular person in the lower mainland, except for the tourists, but they probably wouldn't even notice. Yeah. So, you know, in terms of one of the problems that we've got is that the capacity of the boat, there's no chance, very little chance of changing, both in terms of the dock configuration and something coming in that's much bigger. And, you know, if you build it bigger, then it gets filled, and that's a bigger problem. So assuming that we have that size boat for some considerable period of time, if there's too many walk-on passengers, then they don't load the cars. Because it could ask whether that has to do with the staffing or the number of life jackets or whatever. And similarly, you know, there's, we had problems this weekend, I believe, in terms of at one point on Friday, we were talking about they oversold the number of tickets for the walk-on, so that they weren't going to be able to get everybody off the island. So they don't have any kind of management or control over the numbers of people that they come on, that they allow to come on the boat on, and whether or not they've got the capacity to take them off. So then we're stuck with people abandoned here. And, you know, there's all sorts of volunteers that go down. If the boats are canceled, then there's, you know, people put up in spare rooms and pull out couches and, you know, all the rest of it. And the worst case scenario. It's it's really hard to get any kind of a reaction out of them that in fact is helpful, that is longer than just that immediate situation. So, you know, if they were to put on water taxis on a regular basis, especially for the weekends when they're overselling the water passengers. They don't need to buy a different boat. They can hire some of the boats that are actually in-house sound that they use in an emergency if the boat can't run and they don't have crews and like that. But they don't seem to be able to figure out how to consistently work on problems. That's what the ferry advisory committee was helpful with. And now that they've expanded that, there's even less opportunities if they want to do any. So the whole business about helping either them coming up with part of their budget to help with operations in terms of the lane painting and signage and the actual people to help marshal, because it's a very long line through the middle of the village. Just to or just the number of tourists that come over in terms of the infrastructure problems that we've got, water, toilets and in Stump Cove. So it would be, it's one of the things that can crash the whole system in terms of not having a functioning ferry that this community has to figure out a way to deal with. So you either don't go into the alt mainland or you go an extra hour and waste a whole lot of time. I mean, I've lived on board 45 years, the amount of time, if I actually sat down and figured out how many hours I've spent underground in Horseshoe Bay, would be depressing. But it's part of the price that you pay to live on an island, but it's become really exorbitant. And with all the stuff that's going on with travel to the US, you know, all of the pressures that we feel, there's big urban development in Vancouver, so a lot of people want to get out of their apartments and come over here. We noticed that huge inputs with COVID, but it's now gone away. But now there's even more pressure in terms of staycations and people staying and exploring the areas around them. So this could be, worse than other summers, which is unimaginable. So it's an accident. It's a real crisis. I think it's just waiting to happen.
Well, you probably heard this one. This ferry advisory committees are disbanded as of April 30th. They're, or was April 1st, sorry. Okay, they're promising some kind of engagement platform or some kind of engagement tool, I think. I'll try and keep an open mind until see it, but we'll be looking for your feedback on whether it has any, whether it has any replacement for ICs.
And it's classics around sticky notes and what your priorities be and what's your favorite thing and what makes you happy, what makes you sad. I mean, I don't know how many.
You were
times-
really impressed.
I'm always impressed. I don't know how many times you can actually sit through one of those exercises and not just become totally offended in terms of all of the new people that come into BC Ferries have to get up to speed and have to go through it and have to hear it. And they all sit there and say, oh my goodness, there really is a problem. We can get there all the time, regularly, but beyond that is the real trick.
Accountabilities.
Councillor Fast.
Just following up on trustee Getty's point about foot passenger ferries. Those are one of the ways that we can help with climate action as an island. And the co-benefit is you can get around faster if you can take the bus or bicycle down or whatever to the ferry walk-on. So that's why I'm glad to hear about the transit, Sea to Sky transit idea, and that you articulated the Horseshoe Bay Terminal as a transit hub. And the smoother all foot passengers also can move through there and onto the buses, the better. So if you are involved in the Horseshoe Bay Terminal upgrades, I think it would be, there's a bunch of things that could happen there that I know were talked about back. I was part of those discussions before COVID began. And I think that's one way, making it easier to leave your car at home or closer is one of the ways that may help people on Bowen be able to retain core service of being able to get to their work from their home and school, but also reduce the amount of carbon coming from non-electric vehicles that people are driving in the city. So anyway, I just support the idea of transit sea to sky, and if it helps the whole transportation ecosystem, that's better for Bowman as well. Through the Horseshoe Bay Transit Hub, maybe there could be electrification for buses. I don't know what all could be there. Maybe there'd be some big message boards that tell you when the next bus is coming and when the next fare, what's happening with the ferries before you get into the terminal, just to ease the congestion of people trying to get information and rushing around. Anyway, a few ideas there, but I support it also as climate action. Whatever you can do.
That's right.
Just taking this sort of one level higher, I think what I found really frustrating is, and I've tried to engage various ways. We had the Ferry Advisory Committee, we had some really good people on it. It would go, I think some of our ideas would maybe get transmitted through our questions, but nothing ever came back, you know. And when I think about it, and just listening to this conversation, if we could get, 25 Bowen Islanders and maybe 5 or 10 people from BC Ferries that could actually make decisions and, as you mentioned, understand how the system operates, then we could work together and probably find a solution. But every time I've done that, it's, well, no, we can't afford that. We don't have the budget for that, or that wouldn't work. Yeah, well, how about talking about some things that will work and I mean, this is a huge conversation at the island, and there's, there's a lot of probably good ideas here. But they never get onto the table for discussion.
Last comment on the budget.
I could go on forever as we all could. There was supposed to be planning to expand the passenger capacity and get certification from Transport Canada. And I know when they did the refit, they took out some seats and they put in storage container for more life jackets. So I don't know where, anybody heard where that progress, where they were at with getting, if that would help tremendously if they had more passenger capacity.
How often is the passenger cut off on this, well, on either side? Is it, it's still fairly rare?
No, it's not really.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Last summer it happened several times. And because of down here, and they still sell the tickets, and you can be waiting in the terminal and haven't been there for an hour in your car, and you won't get on because the foot passenger walked up 10 minutes before the ferry was ready to sail and took your space. So, yeah, and it's certain times and heavy times, but if they had extra capacity. And if they had a lower license in the mornings or something, when it's maybe not that 5:30 sailing and their crew hasn't shown up, they could run the boat without that particular crew.
Okay.
But there's, I mean, in the old, we used to meet, it's very advisory committee with senior manager for the route, the terminal manager, and the senior captain for the whole route. And now those people never come to the ferry, didn't ever come to the ferry. So having the people there that can solve the problems. And it's going to be a new because of all the work that's going on in Horseshoe Bay for the next 2 or 3 years until that work's finished. Yeah. You pay for marshalling Horseshoe Bay outside the terminal gates because it's not their property.
Yeah, Ministry of Transportation pays for that.
No, they hired it. Their contractors hired by basically.
Yeah, it's not West Vancouver that pays for it.
No, so that's the other question, I guess, as you and Robert talking about these things, can you find out if they pay for marshalling in any of the other islands?
And I'm on the Marshall on that road that runs down to the departure rate terminal. And I don't know who those contractors are or who pays for that, for example.
Okay, moving on to item 3, maybe we'll just spend a little bit of time on this one, as I know there's a number of items that we need to get to. So we have funding requirements to address the infrastructure deficit. I think here, so what we've done this term is try and grapple with quantifying what our infrastructure deficit is, and then how to go about addressing it. So Bowen Island, on a very rough back of the napkin sort of map, has, you know, assessed that, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on this part. We're sitting at about a $92 million infrastructure deficit. Was the first stab at getting our finger on that number. Since then, we've also launched an asset management planning process. We started to get into the numbers that, you know, start to actually categorize, okay, what shade the sun are some of those pieces in, and then what's the risk and probability of failure. I think those numbers, you know, a high probability and high consequence of risk is at about 32 million across, or 30 million across 3 big asset classes: water mains, culverts, and roads. This is in a community that a 1% tax increase nets us about $70,000 to $80,000 right now. I don't think this is unique to many small communities across the province. I think there's been many discussions that I've had with my colleagues in small communities, and even just recently at AVICC, where we're facing similar challenges. And some of the discussion here, I think, for the province, and I spoke to this to Minister Anderson from local government and rural communities, Minister of State, at the Mayor's Chairs and Chiefs event at AVICC, saying that, like, we need a different funding model for municipalities. You know, we know that there's been a lot of downloading that's happened. I think we're going to talk about emergency management, some of our requirements under that legislation that's to come. But the existing funding model for municipalities, just either raising property taxes or crawling on hands and knees to government to say, give us a grant, doesn't necessarily work when what's really needed is stable infrastructure funding. So with that, unless there's other comments, you know, I don't know how much there is to add on this other than just general advocacy for a small community. I think the Greens in the legislature are nicely positioned across the islands and across some of those small communities to take up the call of small communities from Lions Bay all the way down to Salt Spring as to how we can get at some stable infrastructure funding and what that might look like for 50% of residents that are not in the major urban centers in the province. I'd be curious to hear if you've got any thoughts on that.
I just want to need more thought, but I'll just agree with you. Growing communities fund was nice, but you can't just send this stuff out on a ad hoc basis when you have surplus. In our election platform, we did have, let's take 650 million from the carbon tax and invest it directly in municipal infrastructure because we know that's what's coming. That's not going to be the solution anytime soon, the carbon tax being gone, but I think there has to be, need something besides property taxes, especially in a rural setting like this. So happy to, you know, advocate. I will. Yeah, so I don't know what the solution is for this deficit, but I think I don't having been sat on a municipal council, I don't think that the way the province treats municipalities is particularly healthy in terms of you know, we don't want to give you stable fund. We want to drop in every couple of years and drop $1 million. It's I think it's the same thing to members of council. It's inherently political, which is a problem. So, but in terms of funding source, there's a lot of discussion to have on that provincially, but I'll take it forward and try and bring something back next time. But I think, yeah, I mean, any advocacy you can do through UBCM as you say, 50% of British Columbians is need to be represented in terms of what they can afford to do. So that's not a lot to offer there, but I'm aware of it and happy to support. Let me make that case.
Yeah, so there's two things on the infrastructure deficit. There's the dollar amount and there's the way in which we get the money. So with these grants that come out, you know, for me, with an engineering staff of 3, I'll have to pull somebody off my staff to have them work on a grant application for 30 hours, right? That's difficult when you have an engineering staff of 3.
Yeah.
But when you have an engineering staff of 100 or 30 or whatever it is in the Lower Mainland, it's not as big of a hit to their total hours to do that. So I think one way that could help small communities is if there was predictable block funding for infrastructure that didn't involve these rigorous application processes. Or there's some assistance provided to small local governments, because it is we're competing with organizations that have a lot more depth and capacity to do these grant applications.
Yeah.
And it does divert a lot of our hours in the preparation of those. And then only to find out a lot of them that we get turned down on these applications. So that's a major issue with the system. And so when growing communities fund did come out, it was nice because it's a big chunk of money, but we didn't have to spend a lot of time in terms of staff hours to get that grant money. So I think looking at the way in which it's administered is another important thing that can be done to help small municipalities.
Good place to reduce bureaucracy administration.
It's a small, we get a small communities grant also, so just how big that? So much, I think it's based on a head count. But I can't remember, just ask Crystal.
You know, that there's also some differences, and this has been interesting to spectate both sitting on the Metro Vancouver board and then also participating in the Alliance Trust and watching some large municipalities who absolutely, we know that half the population of the province sits in these urban areas, but those urban areas can fund things like engineering departments in the hundreds. They have very robust, from what I've seen, public relations arms and external relations arms that can do the intergovernmental work, where I think there's a systemic disadvantage to small municipalities who just don't have the staff to do that. We have 3 in our engineering department. We have 0 people that deal with intergovernmental relations. Or like a traditional.
Here we are.
Yeah, like this is, you know, this is us. We don't have that sort of professional advocacy lobbying arm that the larger municipalities do, and I'm sure the Minister of Transportation is probably tired of hearing from Transit from the Mayor's Council, for example, who have a very well-heeled funding strategy and public relations strategy for that external work. Okay. Funding for watershed security. So we did meet with the parliamentary secretary for watershed management at the last UBC. We did get a reply that there is some funding available for watershed security. I'm wondering if Councillor Fast, that you've got you're taking your glasses off, so I was wondering if you wanted to speak to this one, or if our CAO wanted to speak to this one at all.
I can
Yeah.
just say a few words in that Islands Trust has a freshwater strategy that they're bringing out across all of the islands. So they're trying to work with provincial staff, and I think it's been pretty effective in terms of mapping and having some baseline data as the climate is changing, and you can't rely on past records. And but also the challenge of having an island like this with our mayor's been speaking about municipal infrastructure. That's about half the people on Bowen are on municipal infrastructure, and the rest of them are on wells of different kinds. So there's the need to coordinate that, to think about it all together in terms of what are the watersheds capable of absorbing in the winter so that's water in the summer. And in terms of the healthy ecosystems on the land so that the sponge effect can take place and the water can get down into the groundwater area. Bowen's done a bunch of things, just so you know, we've got a conservation development policy to clarify our OCP objectives and things. So right now, nature needs half, 50% of development is supposed to go to conservation and protection of the ecosystem. Site alteration bylaw, parks plan, pesticide use control, these kinds of things are all fairly new in the last under 10 years. And all of these are ways that Bowen is trying to protect the healthy ecosystem so that we can protect our water supply and the quality of the water. And I think we've got $100,000 budgeted for a watershed plan around Grafton Lake, our biggest main water source for Slum Cove and many of the people here hoping to connect Eagle Cliff to it too. And the question of what kind of funding might be available to help when the climate's changing so quickly and we don't have watershed planners on our staff. We'd have to contract them. And again, that's more grant applications and more supervision of contractors and consultants. So I think, is that what the question was? I didn't put this question on the agenda, but that's a little bit of the background as I see it.
I actually forgot to, when I talked about our agreement with this government, it's meant to be year to year, so it's for 2025, and there is what I would almost call a placeholder there on watershed governance in terms of, we know it's not going to happen in 2025. There aren't going to be 10 watershed boards struck in BC in this year, but it was an item of pretty high priority for us. So we've had a couple of the ministers from the Sunshine Coast, so it's pretty well aware of what happens when you don't have a good watershed governance and community discussion, community control to some degree. So we've had some initial discussions. There's $100 million watershed security fund. It's an endowment that's generating money. I would say they're still in pretty early stages of having a kind of an opt-in template for local watershed boards. There's some pilots that have run. I don't have the location of the pilots in front of me, but they're working on trying to come up with something that. But I would suggest that this local government write to them and say we're interested in being fit into this process that you're working on. This is what this is how we would like to govern our watershed and have local knowledge go into it. And that, like, even just putting that in and copying me would be this would be one community I bring up as an example of where it's a high priority. It needs to be looked at. I think so that there's a lot of work to do in terms of what that should look like and how it would be done. But and your overlapping governance piece might make it more complex, but it might be a great example of where you bring different governance pieces into one room and make those decisions for your local water.
It's also a little bit more complicated on Bowen because a large part of our watershed is crown land. So that ties in with reconciliation, and it ties in with, it is part of a cut block. We resisted that maybe 5 years ago, but it's still on the books. And in terms of the condition of the forest and the rest of the province, I think we're still in jeopardy. So, talking about both the aquifers and the recharging and whatever you're working on in terms of the forest management and paradigm shifts and all the climate targets, it's public-private, provincial, First Nations, and whole bunch of interests that I think need to sit down and figure out, what might be best for the water.
Sure. Places there, it's Cowichan watershed, the some that are very prominent. There's Stina, Langley and the Nicola Valley, but they're talking about more pilots, one of Gibson's Peachland potentially, and maybe Bowen, could be at least to put the feeler out and see whether that's possible, so. There is, yeah, I mean, got the impression the minister and their staff are pretty keen to advance this before there's more conflict. I mean, it's the best way to try and avoid conflict over water is to deal with it before there's a crisis. So.
Great. Thanks for that suggestion, because I think we might be in a better position to be a pilot island than many of the islands trust islands, because at least we've got local staff
Yeah.
On the island.
Okay, moving on to sustainable tourism management. Tricky topic here on one I think I mentioned before that another area that we're unique just given our proximity to the mainland and even what we saw, I think this last long weekend, the amount of visitation, particularly the visitation that we have to the island from a tourism standpoint is really remarkable. It is the lifeblood of our local economy. However, the municipality, we don't have the tools or the resources to capture value from that level of visitation and then build out for it in a way that we can adapt to things like impacts on roads, impacts on our roads, just impacts and stuff. And it's difficult to figure out where to get funding to assist with that. One of the, I think we talked a little bit about, the resort municipality distinction and where that would have been for Bowen, but the development of Bowen to the Islands Trust is very different than the other resort municipalities. So we don't have any chain franchises on the island. We don't even have a resort of any medium to large scale. The only accommodation providers that we do have are through Airbnbs or short-term rentals. We've been, even balancing that to regulate people that want to visit our island and stay versus what that does to the housing market. And we did opt into the province's short-term rental legislation last year. It was the principal resident requirement, but there's a real dearth of ability to fit us into any sort of funding scheme that can help us mitigate the impacts of tourism.
Except the MRDT.
Well, except the MRDT. Yeah.
We're applying for that.
Oh, you are looking good at 2% or 3%.
That's up to 3%. We probably look at the 3%, and then that staff is doing the work right now to figure out the division between what that looks like from applied to affordable housing initiatives or tourism management. But really that tourism management, I think, again, comes down to an infrastructure issue. It's like, how do we improve ferry marshaling through here? How do we deal with congestion down in Stump Cove and wayfinding, pedestrian movement, transit? So a lot of the tourism impacts or the ability to adapt to tourism comes down again to core infrastructure issues. Master planning down here in Stump Cove.
Okay. Destination BC is, I think they've moved from destination marketing to a certain degree to destination management, but they're piece of marketing. I mean, MRDT, I guess, is how they're funded, but they're not, unless you've heard differently from them, they're not the people that are going to solve the problem of wayfinding.
No, I mean, it's an interesting discussion, because I think at one of our first UBCMs, we had Councillor Saunders, who's not with us here today, came out of a session that was a tourism session for local government electeds, and the prevailing message was really around how to get more tourism to communities. So a lot of communities are trying to attract tourists. We don't have that issue because we're showing up on viral word of mouth influencer lists and, top 10 places, hidden gems to visit. And then there's already a strong day tripper culture already. So it's, we've got I guess, an abundance of riches in that respect, which is, I think, great for our businesses and great for the economy of the island. But from a municipal standpoint, we don't have any way to capture value on those tourists that are visiting the island. So, BC Ferries has no desire to implement a snug home improvement fee on their tickets. I think other folks look at us like, great, we've got lots of tourists, but from municipal toolbox of how do we fund and mitigate the impacts of that tourism, we just don't, there's not a scrutiny that will let us do that.
Council Marsh mentioned the port fee or whatever they call it off. I have to look into the history of how that
Well, that's done because Nanaimo's a port authority.
federal port.
So Nanaimo. If we were already here, it's not relevant here.
We start our own port, Council.
Is that
We start our own port.
We used to have a port. That's
okay? Yeah, I have for further discussion, but that's the only way that.
And we've got a regional park here. Good regional park, so that's advertised to people looking at the Metro's regional park system.
And then, the regional park has some interesting data as well. So Metro Vancouver collects visitation on regional parks, and then BC Ferries collects data on number of passengers. And we're seeing about 30 to 35% of ferry traffic is driven by visitation to Equipment Park alone, which is a huge number. Metro Vancouver doesn't see it as their job to mitigate the impacts of tourism. I think is some of the discussions on their other park projects or potential park projects on the island shook out. They just want to provide the park and that's it. They see that as an amenity, but mitigating the impact of their visitors in the small community doesn't seem like high priority for them.
Mind you, they do a good job of encouraging people to come on foot as planned. So most of it's foot traffic, and it could fit with their climate 2050 vision about providing a climate friendly future where it's fun to do things that don't emit carbon into the air. But anyway, now we have the Lone Island Conservancy. Sorry, I jumped in.
That's good.
That's a bit of an assumption too, because they don't keep good statistics in terms of from BC Ferries or our tourism or Metro in terms of how people get here and what they do. So if they're not necessarily all walk-ons that go to Equipment Park, vice versa. So it just in terms of who's keeping what statistics and us getting access to it. So that's part of our planning. That's another difficult. So
That's true. They're used trail counters. Yeah.
BC Ferries can't tell us how many people are using an experience card versus being full fares. But when you've got seniors traveling for free Monday to Thursday.
it's also hard to get the information from them.
And you don't just dish it out. Special.
I just offered as a thing, you've got a meeting at 1 and I should go.
Yeah, we're about to go lightning round, because we've got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. Maybe I could zoom through a couple of them.
Yeah.
The noise concerns we've heard, we've been in touch with fiber, heard about this Ocean Watch action group. I think we signed, been in touch. It sounds like they're installing mufflers imminently, possibly this week. I don't know that deals with speed or other issues, but hopefully takes some of the noise, and we can. I'm guessing somebody here is the municipality has been in touch with wood fiber as well on this, or has it mostly been? Maybe it's not, maybe it's our office.
Bowen contributes to Ocean Watch Action Committee. I'm on it. We've got a staff person on it. So I figured that Ruth, through the biosphere, is representing us.
For their credit, it sounds like they've been fairly responsive, which is good. But yeah, hopefully, if it's delayed by longer than a week, we'll be pushing to find out why. So, but it's been going on for a couple of months now, I think. So, for Council Morris Biodiversity System Health Framework, I think that's what you're asking about. We took the opportunity to push the government on this today, being Earth Day, but I don't have anything new on when that actually turns from a framework into legislation.
Council Morris, Coastal Marine Strategy.
Oh, sorry.
Council Fast, Diversity.
Yeah, so we're, that's pretty cost pushing that. Coastal Marine Strategy, I'll have to come back, even though I don't know where that sits.
These have been took a long time.
Yeah.
Just curious as to why.
And then emergency management, most of my discussions with the minister so far have been about Langs Bay and the landslide, but I'm, interested. I know with fire season coming, I'm definitely keen to hear your thoughts on emergency management, how you're impacted by, is that revisions to the act that are
It's not too right. Yeah, the work we have to do. Plan and implementing our babies. How properly well.
I think part of the challenge with the changing regulations, there's a whole change in how we have to consult and the way things get rolled out. And we saw this both actually all in 1 year, I believe, with the emergency management legislation as well as the housing legislation that came down the pipes, where the province delivered a bunch of legislation that really upset sort of the planning processes of our municipality. Absolutely, like housing is a crisis that needs to be dealt with. Emergency management, we know from the wildfires and things that we've seen, like crises that need to be dealt with. But the challenge, I think, for small municipalities is that I speak to the municipalities that are smaller than us in Metro Vancouver, is that with limited staff, like we've got 3 planning staff who are already at capacity and busy to have legislative amendments come down the pipes in such rapid quick succession, really updates or upsets our ability to get things done as a municipality when we've got things in the hopper already that our residents are asking for, and we're already doing the best that we can to chip away at a workload that probably overstretches our capacity.
some financial download as well with emergency planning preparation.
So I think just as the legislative term unfolds, just from the local MLA perspective, just keeping that small municipality lens in mind as to what it's actually going to take to implement some of this stuff on the ground, particularly when we're asking municipalities to do it. We're still digesting the pieces from last term and housing needs reports and how that's all fitting together. So if there's like major changes that are going to come from a top down, I think there needs to be more consultation, particularly from the smaller municipalities about that.
That's really helpful to keep in my opinion. One of the benefits of this agreement is we get a preview of legislation, and there's sometimes opportunity to fit in there and make that's a big consideration for, especially for lots of small communities. So, but thanks for that reminder that haven't seen anything on the list that immediately comes to mind that would affect you, but it's a good overarching piece. So thanks.
Cool. So that seems like a successful venting of all of our issues.
Book fairs.
That's yeah. What this is about, and I'm not going to overpromise, but in a good position to make some of these points painfully slow moving. A lot of it, as you all know, you've been at this for at least 2 years, and many of you a lot longer. incremental change is, yeah, can be frustrating, but at the same time, I think there's an opportunity. There's a lot of moving parts right now, and a full rethink of some pieces. The review of forestry is an example because it's reached a crisis situation. As we shift our economy, the spotlight will fall on tourism, and you'll have been doing the work in the background to make the case for what the actual impacts of tourism are and how the benefits should be spread. So there'll be an opportunity, but it's just a matter of finding the right timing and the right connections. But I would definitely, yeah, as you do anyway, UBCM, talk to your potential allies in a lot of these different areas and band together through whatever means you can to send that message. And it's, as we know with voters, sometimes a letter from 100 people can make, so a letter from 10 municipalities that have grouped together on a certain issue can make a big difference, and it's something that makes it easier for me to advocate for. So, but happy to go to bat for you as a single entity as well. But yeah, there's a lot of places where you can fit into existing programs, and then there's a lot of need for, I'm hearing a lot of need to how you fit into the space between Metro Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, the Islands Trust, Vancouver Island. It's, yeah, there's probably a lot of history there that it's more. I mean, I know Gibson's is considering wanting to be part of the Lower Mainland, so it's just, maybe you should swap.
Right.
I know there's, yeah, these geographical breakdowns don't always work. So there's got to be some ways to smooth out the wrinkles. Anyway,
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what comes out of the government's thoughts on any ideas to changes in the regional district legislation as well. That's being discussed. I think, in closing, one of the pieces that offers that we're happy to support in reverse as well. Being very supportive of the work that you do in the legislature and the work that the Greens do. And I know that a lot of the issues that we've talked about straddle municipal boundaries. Sometimes it's difficult to see, I think, from the municipal level, the forest trees, because we're so involved at the local level. So if there are opportunities that we, like our participation at the riding level, with our neighbors from Squamish or Lions Bay or Whistler or wherever it is, and we can bring us together as local governments to advance some of these agenda items. I think we'd be more than happy to participate in that with you and support the work that you're doing in the legislature to those ends. So,
thank you.
Looking forward to working with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me.
okay. I'm not seeing any further business on the agenda. Can I have a motion to adjourn from Councilor Getty, seconded by Councilor Jurgensen?